Welcome to All Bodies on Bikes, the podcast, where all bodies are good bodies, all bikes are good bikes, and all rides should be celebrated.
All Bodies on Bikes is a movement to create and foster a size-inclusive bike community. So join your hosts, I'm Maggie.
And I'm Marley.
As we explore the complexities of the biking world, help us break down barriers and create the world that we want to see. And don't forget that all bodies really means all bodies, not just larger bodies, but bodies of all sizes, ages, races, abilities, genders, sexualities, and beyond.
Come along for the ride. Well, happy January and welcome back to the All Bodies on Bikes podcast. Long time no talk, Maggie.
I know, right? It's like a whole year. The whole new year.
I was told they're not supposed to say Happy New Year after January 7th, but I call BS on that because it's still like in the big scheme of things. So Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Thanks.
I think that's the thing. Like take a scan. Have you already seen that person? You know?
Yeah.
Maybe not wish them one, but yeah, we haven't seen each other. So Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Well, hey, let's jump right into it because today's conversation is something that I honestly haven't thought about a whole lot, but I'm starting to as I get older. And I'm really excited to dig in and learn and just bring you a topic that we literally have never covered on the show. And that is all about menopause and all the things that go along with it. So today our guest is actually another Feisty podcast host. Last week we had Christy Moan. This week we have Selene Yeager. And let me read her bio. Selene Yeager is the host of the Hit Play Not Pause podcast, content manager at Feisty Menopause, and a best-selling professional health and fitness writer, including the co-author of Roar and Next Level with Dr. Stacy Sims. She lives what she writes as an NASM certified personal trainer, PN1 certified nutrition coach, and lover of all two-wheeled exploits and adventures. Welcome to the show, Selene.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Before we get into it, what is NASM?
National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Oh, okay. So like legitimate.
Yeah, no, legit.
That sounds awful.
No, it doesn't because people have gotten like their cats certified and their dog, I mean, there's many things that you can just, mail in and get a certificate. So
yeah. So this is like
one of the better ones.
You know what you're doing. You've gotten your nutrition. And honestly, you've made a name for yourself as the go-to expert in women's health and performance, specifically as it relates to menopause. Can you tell us a little bit about why this topic is so important to you?
Because I went through it. I mean, very, very seriously, it can, as I discovered, honestly, very firsthand, it can knock women off their game right when they are like really hitting their stride, like right at a time when they're like coming into their own, like it can really take people out. And until very recently, nobody outside of like magazines like Prevention, back in the day, were really talking about it. Nobody talked about perimenopause, which again, Love Prevention talked about 20 years ago. I know because I was writing for them. But even now that it is out there and you're seeing much more of it in the mainstream, most of the conversation and the advice is still centered around women who are sedentary. And it's different for women who are active or athletic or lining up for events. It's just, they need different messaging. They need different care. And it was just crickets. I was really surprised. I mean, even 3 years ago, that even now there's not a ton, geared towards active women.
It's so wild because, people who menstruate, women, folks who are going to go through menopause are half the population. And so it's just another example of like, oh yeah, we just don't have information on this or the science hasn't been done. Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing thank you for bringing light to this. But I guess before we dig in too deep, can we back up a little bit and just broad strokes, what is menopause? What is perimenopause?
Yep. Very easy. Those are very easy. Let's start with perimenopause. It's often being called as the menopause transition now, which I like better because it's just like a clearer term. So at some point you stop producing as many eggs, the ovaries start shutting down the reproductive factory. And when that happens, your hormones, estrogen and progesterone start, they've done this rhythmic menstrual cycle dance forever. And then they hit this period where the factory starts shutting down and everything goes haywire. That's like kind of the best way to put it. All of a sudden, the hormones are like a Jason Pollock painting splashed on the wall. They could be doing anything. And then that period can last up to 10 years or longer in some women,
Wow.
which is really important to know. On average, it says 5 to 7 years, but like most people I talk to are in that longer period where they start
Mm.
noticing stuff. And then menopause is honestly one point in time. When you've been without a period for one full year, you are considered happy birthday. That's your menopause day. And then everything after that is postmenopause. And that's not to say that everything settles down because things still are a little wacky usually, but some things do really start settling down for women at that point.
Okay. Interesting. Um, is there a specific age when perimenopause starts, or does it vary
That's a very
widely?
good question. Very question. There's a huge range for this, right? Like the average age for menopause itself is 51 or 52. Perimenopause, generally, the average age starts at 45, but it's not unheard of it for it to start at like 30, late 30s.
Yeah.
Usually it's the mid 40s where that begins to start. But I just had a woman on the show this week who has done research in what she's calling the late reproductive period, which is that period you're talking about, like before you even notice that your cycles are starting to change, getting a little shorter, getting a little heavier, whatever, some symptoms start cropping up. And those can, and that's a problem because a lot of women will go to their doctors and be like, I'm feeling X, Y, and Z. And they're like, well, you're still getting regular periods, so that can't be that. And that's really not true. Like that late reproductive period, she did the study that found like a lot of the symptoms, which we'll talk about, like the mood symptoms and all that, can start in that before perimenopausal period. And they look a lot like the symptoms that a lot of women don't expect until they're 50.
Fascinating. Because I am right in that phase. I'm 37, almost 38, and a lot of my friends are in this age bracket, a little bit older, and so I'm starting to hear about it. But I'm curious, for somebody in the late reproductive age or,
Mhm.
40s and 50s, what kinds of things should we be on the lookout for? And is it do we need to write things down and then go to our doctor? Like, is it a problem? And I apologize if these are dumb
It
questions.
can be. No, like really the best thing to do, I mean, because we're all pretty in touch with ourselves. So when something is not typical for you, right? When something's a little amiss. And I think, so I've gotten some feedback from women like, oh, they're like, I don't want to scare anybody. And people get like really nervous. And that's not really the point of educating yourself about this.
Mm.
Like I was waking up before, and I knew nothing either. I knew nothing, nothing, nothing except like no more periods and hot flashes and maybe some waking, the stuff that everybody talks about. But I was waking up at like 2 or 3 in the morning every night with sheer panic, like
Mm.
feeling like the world was crashing down around me, talking myself down. And then I started waking up with like a Palm Springs sprinkler system, like literally projectile sweating, panicking. I'm just like, what is happening to me? And if I once you feel better even if that is still happening. Like once I knew that was hormonal, I was like, okay. I'm not coming
Mhm.
undone. I'm not losing my mind. This is not, it's like I can deal with this. And then you can take like, steps to address it, whether it be therapies or whatever, but even just knowing what it is really helpful. So women can get, I'll just list like broad brush symptoms. I mean, they can get joint pain out of nowhere, like muscle and joint pain. Mood disorders are really common. Lack of motivation. Like I talk to a lot of triathletes who they're super high performing, very motivated, and like one day, sort of out of nowhere, their mojo just goes and they're not into it anymore.
Hmm.
You hear a lot of this kind of stuff, and that's because like there are estrogen receptors on nearly every cell of your body, and it affects like your serotonin system, your cortisol, your insulin, like it affects every system in your body. So when those hormones start doing that crazy dance that I was talking about, it impacts honestly everything before
Yeah.
you even notice that your periods might be off. Like I didn't track my periods. Like I wouldn't notice a few days here or there.
That makes so much sense. And I think I'm going to start paying attention a little more because some of these things you're saying, I'm like, oh, maybe. Huh. Yeah. And who knows? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had known the anxiety piece because that, it was very unnerving.
Yeah, and you mentioned the mood disorders. Does it trend towards anxiety or depression, or is it like
Both.
okay, and does it have
Mm.
anything to do with like what you are already working with mentally?
That's a great, interesting question because women who do have a history of some of those mood disorders are they think that, and that makes sense, right? That they seem to be more at a high risk for those. But a lot of women get anxiety, fear on a mountain bike. Like, I mean, I raced around the world on my mountain bike, and I would be on a downhill in my backyard trails that I'd done a million times and freeze and have to walk it
Mm.
like out of nowhere because
Yeah.
yeah, estrogen works with fear extinction. So it's just like so interesting, right? Again, like knowing this stuff really really does matter. But yeah.
Yeah, I
So
feel like
anyway, to answer your question even further though,
please.
adverse childhood experiences, past trauma, all of that stuff is very highly correlated with a harder menopause experience.
Oh,
Mm.
goody. I'm so excited.
Just something to know. I mean, because the shit that's happened in the past sort of can come back up in a harder way because I think it's just because you don't have the defenses to keep shoving it down, as your hormones. It's a good time to work through some stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think awareness is the first step of like, this isn't just in my head. There could be something else going on here.
Mm.
100%.
Yeah. I have another question. Sorry, going back to the age stuff. Is there any trends across like racial or
Yes.
ethnicities?
Mm.
Yes.
Because I know like puberty
Another.
like hits different populations differently. Sorry, I totally
Yep.
interrupted you.
Oh, no, not at all. Another really good question because yes, Black women tend to go through the transition earlier and have worse symptoms. And, the research suggests, unsurprisingly, that is because of stress and weathering, cultural weathering, because the stress piece is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a whole nother topic that,
Yes.
yeah, I it just makes my heart hurt to think about the stress that Black women in our country go through.
Yeah.
Um, well, I'd love to shift it a little bit to talk about sport and menopause.
Sure.
So we talked about it a little bit at the beginning. I want to talk about you real briefly. So you've done mountain bike racing, correct me if I'm wrong, triathlon, all sorts of
Oh,
endurance
yeah.
stuff.
Yep.
Do you have
Gravel.
any favorites?
Yeah, I will always be a mountain bike racer at heart
Okay.
or rider. I put down the racing of my mountain bike a few years ago, started gravel racing just because I had done everything I wanted to do. I was a stage racer for a bunch of years, but like if you made me choose one bike, it would be that one. With gravel my bike being a very close second. And now I've gotten into bike packing, which I really enjoy quite a bit. But yeah, I still like the long stuff. I did Kona and that cured me of triathlon for many, many years. And then I finally like literally 15 years later did a half last year, a 70.3. And it was only because it finished on the 50-yard line of Beaver Stadium. I went to Penn State and I was like, wow, that's rad. You got to
Yeah,
run through the tunnel onto the nobody can ever go on Penn State, turf. But we were allowed, it was cool. We were on the Jumbotron.
that's
Nice.
So
super cool. And I
yeah.
guess worth running a half Ironman.
Almost. The
Yeah.
running part, almost.
Almost,
Yeah.
almost.
It's funny. I'm signed up for a duathlon at the beginning of
Mm.
February, but it's a team duathlon. So I technically am only doing the bike part, but there definitely is some curiosity piqued in me. Um, anyway, back to the topic at hand. Um, so you mentioned, kind of that fear factor kicking in with the estrogen level changes, but how does menopause affect women's participation in sports, both, at the recreational level and professionally?
There's no studies per se that I could find that make the direct correlations, but you do see quite a drop off when in the 50s, and I can't help but to think that based on anecdotally what I've heard from women, that it can definitely make women leave the starting lines,
Mhm.
recreationally and professionally, though, like we're seeing women go into their 50s now, especially in the longer stuff. Mel McQuaid just made history as being the first person, male or female, to qualify as a pro and compete in world championship, which was very rad.
So
And
cool.
you've got women in their 50s winning outright race across America, like really it's a lot of very cool stuff. But, when you think about all of the things going on. I mean, muscle loss is huge. And
Mm,
I should have mentioned that. Like, research shows that women can lose 10% of their muscle during the perimenopausal period alone, which
wow.
is
Wow.
big. Yes. And your power, that was the thing that finally made me go like, okay. I mean, I just felt like somebody unplugged me, and I was
Mm.
just like, this is what is happening. Like this, I had power just not that long ago, and it felt like so it can happen quite suddenly. And if you look at graphs at hormones, you can see why. Like all of a sudden they just go boom, like sort of
Mm,
like right off a cliff. So I mean that, yeah, I've heard from, and that's actually the great part of doing this podcast. And what I've done is I hear from women every single week that they are just thanking me. I sometimes I meet women and they start crying, like they thought they were done, they thought that there was nothing they could do, and then they find help, in the form of either hormone therapy or other therapies, changing how you train, lifting heavier, like because you have to sort of pick up where those hormones are leaving off, right? And that's what Next Level is all about. That's what the podcast is all about, is like how to help your physiology as it's changing. And there's lots of stuff you can do. But I hear from women all the time that are just like they're so grateful, and I feel like it's the most important work of my life, honestly.
I love that. I actually had a locker room conversation the other day with two women who were talking about menopause, and I recommended them to your podcast because they were
Well,
just
thank you.
saying like we feel like we have no information or like nobody's talking about this, and they were high level triathletes, and so
Yeah.
you're doing good work, and I think your podcast, and we'll talk about that, and we'll include a link to it, but it's called Hit Play Not Pause,
Yep.
and then you mentioned a book next level. Is
Next
that a book
Level.
with
Yep.
Dr. Stacy Sims? Is that right?
Yep.
And if you're watching this on YouTube, she's holding it up right there. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, really, really cool. I'm gonna let Maggie jump in here.
Hi,
I'm
Maggie.
gonna. Oh, hey, how's it going?
All right.
I get caught up in listening and forget to say words. You mentioned the muscle loss. What are some of the other like physical symptoms that athletes, female athletes especially, tend to go through?
Well, there's muscle loss, and then there's also, the body composition just shifts, right? So that you often gain more visceral fat, you lose muscle, and hot flashes whenever, like, Google menopause women images, and you'll see 12,000 women with fans, right? They're all
Mm-hmm.
like so many fans because your thermoregulation, your hypothalamus gets a little haywire too, and that does more than hot flashes and night sweats. It can make it harder to manage your temperature
Mm.
during things, during an event. I had Mag de Boulet, who's a ultra runner, on the show, and she just struggled so much with that because she was running Leadville, and she's like, there weren't enough layers to sort of figure out how to, like, she's like, I'm hot, I'm cold, I'm sweating, I'm freezing, so it, like,
Yeah.
that can definitely cause some issues. And the vaginal changes are not something to be dismissed either, because the the vulva and the vagina can become drier and thinner, which causes pain.
Mm,
Like, you talk about pain in a bike seat, it can cause pain, and it also, that those changes in those tissues can open the door on urinary incontinence, whether stress incontinence. I've talked to women who just, like, they've started wetting themselves. The very good news with that is that hormone therapy, like vaginal estrogen, is super safe for pretty much everybody, and it takes care of a lot of that.
Mm.
So that's
cool.
like my plug. Yeah, people can argue about hormone therapy all day long. Nobody really argues about that.
Interesting. Is it ever, and maybe this is way too nitty-gritty and such a personal question.
Never,
Uh,
never really.
No.
My show is he's just the stuff we talk about. But anyway.
I love it. No, it needs to be talked about. But
Yeah.
with the and I'm coming at this from like an endurance cycling perspective. Are the changes significant enough that, folks are changing the cycling short and chamois that they're
Yes.
using or changing their bike seat? Like it is that significant.
Yeah, I have a whole show coming up on vaginas for that, just for that. Yes, because it is like the padding that you have, your natural padding can
Hmm.
get less padded,
Yeah.
and it
Mm.
changes your relationship with that chamois and that saddle. So yeah, it definitely can.
Fascinating. Well, I guess on that same note, are there any specific sports or types of movement that are better or worse for folks going through menopause?
Resistance training is non-negotiable. I mean,
Mm.
just because of that loss of the muscle, it's just so important, and bone. Menopause is kind of a black diamond skid for bone loss. Like 20% of the bone loss that women face can happen that 5 to 7 years around menopause is big.
Wow.
And there's a big genetic component to that. So if osteoporosis runs in your family, I highly recommend people getting a bone density scan around the time of menopause just to make sure, because hormone therapy is FDA approved to prevent osteoporosis. A lot of people don't know that. Yeah, and
Interesting.
it can really help. I mean, there's a big heritable component to osteoporosis, and you'll know it if it runs in your family, but that is something to really pay attention to. So resistance training just becomes more important. It helps with the bone, with the muscle. It helps you become more durable because
Hmm.
injuries can rise at this time too. Your connective tissues, estrogen and progesterones also help with like the laxity and the tension in your connective tissues. So you see people showing up with more injuries, and resistance training also helps with that. And mobility work. I tell people everybody should be doing more mobility work too.
And realistically, people at every age should be doing resistance
Yeah,
training
you
and
just can't
mobility
get away
work.
with it.
And yeah,
That's really it.
yeah, we're meant to lift heavy things and move our bodies in a way
Yeah.
that feels good, but definitely meant to move our bodies.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Um, so I guess, you know, on that exact same note, is there any research to suggest that, exercise or moving your body can help alleviate symptoms? Like, does it work that way at all?
It does. It goes back to that stress piece. I mean, the whole stress component is stress definitely exacerbates all of the symptoms, and especially when you talk, it's harder to manage cortisol. So if you're always sort of in that fight or flight, sympathetic sort of state, there's more hot flashes, your mood, your sleep gets disturbed, sleep disturbances are big. So anything you can do to sort of like bring that stress down, and exercise is often a very good way to relieve your stress. Whether or not it does anything, meaningful for hot flashes is debatable, but I've seen research go both ways. But 100% it can help with all that other stuff.
Yeah, and that makes sense again, just for an every person perspective.
Yes.
When I'm in a bad mood, convincing myself to work out or just go for a
Yep.
walk, like I don't know. I think it's the perpetual battle that we all face.
Yeah. Can
But
Yeah,
then
definitely
you
help.
get out there and it's like, why did I have to fight to get out here in the first place? I feel so much better than I did
So
when I
much better.
started.
so much
Yeah.
better. Yeah. Well, clearly, Celine, there's like so much to learn about and research and scientific stuff to learn about on this topic. I would love to hear about the work that you're doing, and I hear you've got like a course in the works. Can you tell us a little bit about that and who it might be appropriate for and who might be interested?
Sure can. So yeah, I mean, again, I have the podcast, which is Hit Play Not Pause. We've been on air since 2020. So we're going in our fourth year, which is
Nice.
unbelievable to me, and so obviously I do weekly newsletters and blogs. I've interviewed hundreds at this point of women, and we wanted to put together a way to navigate all this information. So the course is actually called Navigate Menopause, and it covers everything from how did we get so lost? Like, why don't I often wanted to call this show like, why didn't I know this? Like, why we didn't know this? Like, where, the history of blocking up menopausal women, but also just like, really helping women navigate all of it, the symptoms that they might be experiencing, why they're experiencing them, what to do about it, how to adjust their training, their programming, their nutrition, like sort of soup to nuts of helping them chart their own personal course through this journey. So that'll be on the sale on the 22nd.
And it's an online, is like a self-guided
Yes.
course. Okay.
Oh, there's cohorts. So we'll open it up and get however many hundreds of people and then close it when we're full. And then we go through it. It's a cohort based thing. So we have the lovely Linda Rowan taking people through it, which is great. She's such a good teacher and such a good instructor. So I'm really psyched that they brought her on.
Nice. And I imagine folks find community and they find support in knowing that there's so many other folks who are navigating this.
The sharing part is amazing. We had a couple of in-person menopause retreats down in Florida, and they're just magical. I mean, it's really cool because a lot of women, Marley, feel alone. That's what I hear
Mm.
over and over and over again. Like they have a hard time finding their community. You know, a lot of people are not active, and sometimes they just feel like they're the only ones going through this, and they even when I've heard women just stop riding with their usual groups because they just feel like they're just not able to keep up and they're struggling. So the community is everything.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And so this course, it releases on the 20th, you said?
It goes for sale on the 22nd,
On the
and then it'll go
22nd.
live in February.
And where can folks find more information about it?
At feistymenopause.com, and I can give you a link for that.
Perfect. And we will have a link in the show notes. Definitely go
Yeah.
check that out. It sounds like it'll be super beneficial, whether you're a elite level athlete listening to our podcast, which I hope there's some of you out there, or just everyday folks navigating this course of life that we're all going through.
Yep.
So yeah. And then, obviously you said you went through menopause, you
I
went through
did.
this. Is there one or two nuggets that you want to share with people?
Yeah, I do. You know, one of the reasons that I really was inspired to get involved in this community and start this, especially Feisty Menopause and Hip Play Not Pause, is I wanted a more positive place for women to go because there's so much negativity. I mean, it's a sea of negativity. Like I said, if you Google the images, it all looks like hell. And I'm just like, okay, it is challenging, but it's also such a it's a real empowering time of life. You really step into yourself in a way that um I haven't in any other time of my life. It really is a time of what do I want to be? Who do I want to be? You just sort of like, you know, take the husk off of like all the stuff that doesn't matter. You give so less fucks. It's just such a better, there's a lot to be gained. It's a very empowering transition.
Well, the way you say that makes me almost excited for it. Also, I hate my period. As somebody
Oh,
who doesn't plan to have
amen. Oh my
children, it
God.
just,
Like so over it.
yeah,
Yeah. I
it
don't miss that one bit.
it has been the bane of my existence since I was 11 years old. And man,
Yep.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
well,
Not me. I love mine.
well,
Yeah, gee.
Just in case anyone was wondering.
lucky.
My goal in 2024 is to lie more to my friends.
Starting right now, talking about your period.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Well, Selene, we have two questions we like to ask everybody at the end of our episodes.
Okay.
And the first one is, what would your perfect day outside look like?
Oh, that's an easy one. I would head to the lake with my mountain bike or a gravel bike and paddle boards, go for a
Yes.
long ride, pick up some lunch along the way, come back, blow up the boards, eat lunch, and then just go paddle boarding around while I look at birds. And then if it's a really nice day, come home and start a fire in the backyard and hang out in the backyard in the evening.
That sounds
Same.
incredible.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah, we're deep in winter right now in Arkansas. We got like an inch of
Same in
snow today,
Pennsylvania.
and it's gonna be like negative next week. And just being on a lake on a paddleboard sounds lovely.
that sounds
Yeah.
perfect. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other thing we like to know is, especially since you are such an expert on a topic, what is something else that you wish you got to talk about more, that more people would ask you about?
This was such a funny question because, I'm very public and because for people who don't know, I also wrote for bicycling for like 27 years. So sort of had a blog there. I'm very public. So a lot of times I'm like, I like to keep the introvert Selene private. So that, when I first saw this question that you shared with me ahead of time, I was like, I don't wish they'd ask me anything.
As
That
a
is
public figure, I
fair-
also understand that.
Right.
It's a
I
fair
figured you
answer.
would. But like I'm a bird nerd. So I am happy to talk about birds
Amazing. Okay.
all, all day when, if you don't want to when we're done talking about all the other things, like we can talk
I love
about
that.
some sharp-shing hawks or whatever.
I spent an hour outside of work last Friday with my camera getting just 600 pictures of pied-billed grebe.
Oh, I will see.
Yep. So I love it.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, Selene, this has been eye-opening. It has been
Yes.
informative. And I hope that readers, maybe you're reading this. I hope that listeners
I understand.
leave with like a sense of empowerment and just, I
Yeah,
mean,
me
more than
too.
anything, where to get more information. So, we'll say it one more time. Celine's podcast is Hit Play Not Pause. There's sounds like a 4-year catalog of back episodes to go back and
Lots of
listen
stuff.
to. And I've listened to quite a few of them, and they are incredible, very well researched, and just so much good information there. And then the say the name of the course one more time.
Navigate menopause.
Navigate Menopause comes out on the 22nd, and you can find out more information at feistymenopause.com. And we'll have
Yep.
links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Celine.
Thank you for having me. Thanks
You're
for the work you
welcome.
guys do too. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you. And thanks for being a good ally.
You bet.
This is an All Bodies on Bikes podcast powered by Feisty Media. The show is produced by Maggie and Marley and edited by the team at Feisty Media. Thanks for listening.
Are you tired of getting caught in the rain with poorly fitting, flimsy rainwear? Well, let me introduce you to Cleverhood, makers of thoughtfully designed, durable, and size-inclusive rainwear. Cleverhood is designed by women, but is made for everyone who wants to embrace the elements and enjoy the ride, no matter the weather. Cleverhood was born out of the need to make rainy days into happy days, and with multiple choices of styles and sizes, all bodies can stay dry, visible, and happy. Maggie and I especially love their rain cape. Literally, the only thing you need to fit is the head hole. Otherwise, it just fits. It's so cute and functional, and I feel like a superhero when I ride my bike in it. All of Cleverhood's designs have reflective elements thoughtfully integrated, including an option to customize it with the All Bodies on Bikes logo. They're also sustainable, with most of their fabrics made from recycled fibers and PFC-free DWRs. Social sustainability matters to Cleverhood too, and they only work with certified producers who follow labor and environmental standards, and they give nearly 5% of their profits back to community organizations, including All Bodies on Bikes. So whether you're commuting on a dreary morning, walking your dog in the rain, or waiting for the bus, Cleverhood is a great option. And remember, you can use the code ALLWEATHER for 15% off of your order.